Hi guys, how you doing? 10 to 14. And me. And pop out chat. So, got a hot day here today. We're gonna see about having my fan going. It looks like it's not too bad into the sound. Good. So how you guys doing today? Hope you're doing good. I am going to, where is it? Twitter. Retweeter. Who else? And that's good for now. That is good for now. Let's see. So today I'm just going to continue with my blankie. I've got a bunch of these are all ready at this point. They're all sewn in and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's a matter of just doing up the Nadine spit it out. Just doing up the centers or the borders and joining it all. I didn't bother with my background today. I figured it would be too white. And I got a oops, leaned too far forward. I got a dishcloth done, knitted. It was just 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 purl, and then the opposites of those 2 rows are the same thing. So 2 rows with the stockinette on the one side, and then 2 rows with stockinette on the other side. And it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, for a little checkery pattern. For dishcloth works good. Works good. Anyway, so let's see here. And there we go. Okay, did I save up that? Let's have a see. Chapters 10 to 14. I did. Wow, I'm pretty smart. Pretty smart today. So, oops, mute myself first so you guys don't get a blast of the double hearing.
Chapter 10 of Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Melanie Jensen. Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan by Richard Gordon Smith. A Faithful Servant. In the reign of Emperor Engi, which began in the year 901 AD, there lived a man whose name has ever since been celebrated on account of his beautiful writings, poetic and other. He was the emperor's great favorite, and consequently he was the strong man of the day. His name was Sugawara Michizane. Needless to say, it was not very long before, with all these things in his favor, he was the head of the government, living in luxury. Things went well enough for a time, but the inevitable came at last. Not all the people agreed with Michizane's ideas or his politics. Secret enemies lurked at every corner. Among them was one particularly bad man named Tokihira, whose poisonous intrigues at court were constant. Tokihira held a government position under Michizane, and hated him in his heart, thinking that if he could but arrange to get Michizane into the bad graces of the emperor, he himself might become leader of the government. Michizane was a man with whom little fault could be found, and so it came to pass that Tokihira was unable to find any cause for starting evil reports about him. But as time went on, he became more determined to do evil in the end. At last an opportunity arrived. Tokihira, who had many secret agents trying to discover something to be reported to the emperor against Michizane, heard a statement that Prince Tokinomiya, had fallen secretly in love with the beautiful daughter of Michizane, and that they held secret meetings. Tokihira was overjoyed at the news, and went straight away to the emperor, who received him, hearing that he had a marvelous tale of intrigue to tell. "Your Majesty," said Tokihira, "much as I grieve to tell it, a serious plot is about. Sugawara Michizane has so arranged it that your Majesty's younger brother, Prince Toki, has fallen in love with his daughter. Deeply as I regret to say it, they hold secret meetings. Moreover, Michizane, your Majesty's premier, is scheming that your Majesty may be assassinated, or at least dethroned in favor of Prince Toki, who is to marry Michizane's daughter." Naturally, the Emperor Engi was infuriated. He was a good and sound monarch, and he had ruled the people, with the aid of Michizane, fairly, firmly, and well. He had looked upon Michizane as a personal friend, and to think of Michizane conspiring his assassination, or at all events so scheming as to place Prince Toki on the throne, and to marry his own daughter to the prince, was more than he could stand. He sent for Michizane. Michizane protested his innocence. True it was, he said, that the prince had fallen in love with his daughter, but that was not much to be wondered at. His daughter was beautiful. The prince and she were much of the same age, and had seen much of each other from their childhood. Now that they had grown older, they found that their friendship had turned to love. That was all. It was not easy for a prince of the blood royal to meet the lady of his heart quite so openly as another might, and, no doubt, they had met, for his daughter had told him so. As to the plot asserted by Tokihira, that was absolutely fanciful, and it was an astonishment to hear of so dastardly an accusation. Tokihira perceived the temper of the emperor. By loud words and unscrupulous lies he upset all the unfortunate Michizane's protests, and the emperor ordered Michizane to be sent for the rest of his life to Tsukushi, in the island of Kyushu. Accompanied only by his faithful servant Matsuo, Michizane went into exile. The punishment of Michizane, unjust as it was, broke up the employment of many others. All those who had been closely associated with him were dismissed. Among them was Takebayashi Genzo, who had been one of Michizane's chief attendants. Genzo had been one of Michizane's literary pupils. Consequently, it is not astonishing that on losing employment, Genzo fled to a small town, and out of duty took with him Michizane's wife and young son Kansushai, aged 10. All changed their names, and Genzo, to support them as well as his own family, established a small school. Thus it was that for some time Kansushai escaped the wicked designs against his life that had been planned by Tokihira. Matsuo, the faithful servant who had followed his master Michizane into banishment, heard of a vile plot to assassinate his master's son, and after many weary days of thought as to how he could prevent it, he perceived that the only way would be to sacrifice his own son instead. First he told his banished master of his intention, and having obtained leave, he journeyed back to Kyoto, and sought out Tokihira himself, to whom he offered his services both as a servant and as a hunter of Michizane's son, Kansusai. Tokihira readily engaged him, thinking now that he would be sure to find the boy whom he wished to have beheaded. Tokihira had taken the place of Michizane in the emperor's favor and had great power. His will was almost law. So well did Matsuo play his part in Tokihira's household and among his servants, it was not long before they were all agreed that Matsuo was most faithful to his new master, and the greatest confidence was placed in him. Shortly after this, it came to the knowledge of Tokihira that Kansusai was hidden under a different name in the school which belonged to Genzo. Genzo was ordered to send the boy's head to Tokihira within 48 hours. Matsuo, ever faithful, hearing of this, went to Genzo's school in disguise and disclosed to the schoolmaster, whom readily assented, his scheme for saving Kansusai. Then Matsuo sent his son, Kotaro, to Genzo's school, from which he never returned alive, poor boy. And though, in honor be it said, Genzo did not like the killing of this boy, it steeled his nerves for the sake of his former master and now to save Kanshusai's life. With one blow of his sword he took off the innocent head. At the appointed time, Tokihira's official called at the school to fetch it, and they carried it back to Tokihira, saying, "Now, Lord Tokihira, there is no longer fear for the future from Michizane's son, for here is his head in this box. See, and here is the schoolmaster Takabayashi Genzo, who followed your lordship's orders and cut it off." Tokihira was pleased, but not perfectly assured that the head was the right one. So, knowing that Matsuo had previously been employed by Michizane, and that he must know if it were Kanshusai's head or not, he called him, ordering him to take the head out of the box and identify it. Poor Matsuo! Imagine his feelings at having to draw his only son Kotaro's head from the box and hold it up by the hair and assure the Lord Tokihira that it was indeed the head of Kanshusai, Michizane's son. He did so, however, with great nerve and splendid fortitude, thus saving the life of Kanshusai and fulfilling his duty to his banished master Michizane. Matsuo's fidelity is still adored by those who know the story. Not long after, a terrible thunderstorm came over Kyoto. A thunderbolt crashed through Tokihira's palace and killed him. To this day, people say that Michizane's spirit came down in the shape of that thunderbolt to be avenged. End of Chapter 10. Recording by Melanie Jensen.
Chapter 11 of Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan by Richard Gordon Smith. Prince Hosokawa's most valuable title deeds. Footnote: told to me by Mr. Matsuzuki, and said to be perfectly true, the document in question being in possession of the present Prince Hosokawa. End note. Several hundred years ago there dwelt in lands of the Hosokawa a widow and her daughter, a beautiful girl of 17 named Kazui. O Kazui-san's father had been foully murdered some 6 months before, and both Kazui and her mother had made up their minds to devote their fortune and their lives to bringing the criminals to justice. In these efforts they received no help, but spent the whole of their money, until at last they were almost forced to beg in the street for food. Day after day, however, they continued to pray in the temple for help, and never once lost heart or weakened in their purpose. O Kazui told her mother that were she fortunate enough to gain the affections of a man, even he should be sacrificed in the effort after vengeance. One day it came to pass that the poverty-stricken appearance of Kazui and her mother, returning as usual from praying in the temple, aroused the mirth of a party of roughs who proceeded to insult them. A handsome young samurai, Okawa Joymon, happened to come along. Drawing his sword, he very soon put the roughs to flight. Having done this, and bowing low, he asked whom he had the honor of serving. O Kazui answered for her mother, and quickly recognized that this handsome youth was just such as she had longed to meet, so that he might fall in love, and wished to help her in seeking out the murderer of her father. Therefore, not unnaturally, she encouraged him, and he fell in love with her. In the meanwhile, an old friend of Kazui's father, feeling great sorrow for her, had found a place for her in Prince Hosokawa's household, and there she won such favor in the eyes of the prince, or, as the title then was, daimyo, that the other maids began to be jealous. It happened that one evening Okawa, now desperately in love with Okazuri, in spite of being the retainer of another daimyo, felt that he must see her at all costs. He arranged a secret meeting, and eventually found his way to Kazui's apartment. Still full of desire for vengeance, she seized upon the occasion to pour forth her story and implore assistance. Okawa, being a true knight errant, vowed that he would speak no more of love until he himself had hunted down and killed the murderers of Kazui's father. Just as he had finished making this vow, one of the jealous maids, who had been listening, made her presence known, and rushed off to tell her mistress. What was to be done? Okawa, the retainer of another daimyo, caught in the castle secretly conversing with one of the Hosokawa maids of honor. Surely both he and she would suffer death. O Kazui was not long in thinking. She hid her lover in an old armor case. That, however, was no use. She was instantly summoned into the presence of the daimyo, and the armor chest was carried in as well. The daimyo, furiously angry, ordered that O Kazui should be killed. Okawa spoke up. He said that she was in no way responsible for this secret meeting, and the fault was entirely his, and begged that he might be allowed to die in place of her. Moreover, he told the whole story of Kazui's life, and mentioned that her ambition in life was to avenge the death of her father. The daimyo was greatly touched. Recognizing the chivalry on both sides, he took Okawa into his own service, promising at the same time to aid them both in fulfilling their purpose. Tears of gratitude came into Okawa's eyes, and he vowed there and then to sacrifice his life for Hosokawa on the very first opportunity. After about a year had passed, a great fire broke out in the castle. It was so sudden that nothing could be done. The wind, fanning the flames, barely gave time for the people to escape, much less to carry off the family valuables. When all were clear of the burning mass, the daimyo suddenly remembered that his title deeds would be lost, and that such a disaster would be dangerous for his family. Realizing this, he jumped from his horse and was about to dash back to try and recover them, but his retainers held him, fearing that he would die. Okawa, hearing this, thought with delight that now an opportunity had come to him to save his new master and pay him for the kindness to himself and Kazui. He rushed into the burning mass, and having broken open the iron safe, seized the valuable documents. Then he found escape impossible. He was cut off by fire on all sides and plainly saw that both he and the papers must be burned. At this moment a thought came to him. Though he must be burned, possibly his body might save the documents. Drawing his short sword, he deliberately disemboweled himself and thrust the roll of papers into his stomach. Then he flung himself on the flaming floor and died. The fire went on. Poor Okawa was charred beyond recognition. When the fire was over his body was recovered, and inside the roasted corpse was found the blood-stained roll of papers on which the Hosokawa family depended. From that time on the document has been called Hosokawa no Chi Daruma, the blood-stained document of the Hosokawas. End of chapter 11. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 12 of Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan by Richard Gordon Smith. The Story of Kato Sayemon. In the days when Ashikaga was shogun, there served under him a knight of good family, Kato Sayemon, of whom he was especially fond. Things went well with Sayemon. He lived in what might almost be called a palace. Money he possessed in plenty. He had a charming wife who had borne him a son, and according to old custom he had many others who lived as wives within his mansion. There was no war in the land. Sayemon found no trouble in his household. Peace and contentment reigned. He enjoyed life accordingly by feasting and so forth. Oh, that such a life could last, thought he. But fate decreed otherwise. One evening, when Sayemon was strolling about in his lovely garden, watching the fireflies and listening to singing insects and piping toads, of which he was extremely fond, he happened to pass his wife's room and to look up. There he saw his dear wife and his favorite concubine playing chess, go in Japanese. What struck him most was that they appeared perfectly happy and contented in each other's society. While Sayemon looked, however, their hair seemed to rear up from behind in the shapes of snakes, which fought desperately. This filled him with fear. Sayemon, in amazement, stealthily approached in order to see better, but he found the vision just the same. His wife and the other lady, when moving their men, smiled at each other, showing every sign of great courtesy. Nevertheless, there remained the indistinct outlines of their hair, assuming the forms of fighting snakes. Hitherto Sayemon had thought of them as almost sisters to each other, and so outwardly had they in fact appeared. But now that he had seen the mysterious sign of the snakes, he knew that they hated each other more than could be understood by a man. He became uneasy in his mind. Until then his life had been rendered double happy because he thought his home was peaceful, but now, he reflected, hatred and malice must be rampant in the house. Sayemon felt as if he were a rudderless boat, being drawn towards a cataract from which no means of escape seemed possible. He spent a sleepless night in meditation, during which he decided that to run away would be the safest course in the end. Peace was all that he craved for. To obtain it, he would devote himself to religious work for the rest of his life. Next morning, Kato Sayemon was nowhere to be found. There was consternation in the household. Men were dispatched here, there, and everywhere, but Sayemon could not be found. On the 5th or 6th day after the disappearance, his wife reduced the establishment, but continued herself with her little son Ishidomaro to live in the house. Even the Shogun Ashikaga was greatly disconcerted at Sayemon's disappearance. No news of him came, and time passed on until a year had gone, and then another, when Sayemon's wife resolved to take Ishidomaro, aged 5, and go in search. For 5 weary years they wandered about, this mother and son, making inquiries everywhere, but not the slightest clue could they get, until at last one day they were staying at a village in Kishu, where they met an old man who told them that a year before he had seen Kato Sayemon at the temple of Koya-san. "Sure," he said, "I know him, for I was once a palanquin bearer for the Shogun, and often saw Sayemon-san. I cannot say if he is at the temple, but he was a priest there a year ago." For Ishidomaro and his mother there was but little sleep that night. They were in a fever of excitement. Ishidomaro was now 11 years of age, and was most anxious to have his father at home. Both mother and son, happy after their long years of searching, eagerly looked forward to the morrow. Unfortunately, according to ancient regulations, Koya-san Temple and Mountain were only for men. No woman was allowed to ascend to worship the image of Buddha on this mountain. Thus, Ishidomaro's mother had to remain in the village while he went in quest of his father. At daybreak he started, full of hope, and telling his mother not to fear. "I will bring back father this very evening," said he, "and how happy we shall all be! Farewell for the time being, and fear not for me." So saying, Ishidomaro went off. "True," he said, "I do not know my father by sight, but he has a black mole over his left eye, and so have I. Besides, I feel that it is my father I am going to meet." With that, and such other thoughts in his mind, the boy plodded upwards through the tall and gloomy forests, stopping here and there at some wayside shrine to pray for success. Higher and higher Ishidomaro climbed. Koya-san is near 1100 feet in height, until he reached the outer gates of the temple, of which the true name is Kangobuji, for Koya-san means only Koya Mountain. Arrived at the first priest's house, Ishidomaro espied an old man mumbling prayers. "Please, sir," said he, doffing his hat and bowing low, "could you tell me if there is a priest here called Kato Sayemon? Greatly should I be obliged if you could direct me to him. He has only been a priest for 5 years. For all that time my dear mother and myself have been in search of him. He is my father, and we both love him much, and wish him to come back to us." "Ah, my lad, I feel sorry for you," answered Sayemon, for it was indeed he. "I know of no man called Kato Sayemon in these temples." Delivering himself of this speech, Sayemon showed considerable emotion. He fully recognized that the boy he was addressing was his son, and he was under sore distress to deny him thus, and not to recognize and take him to his heart. But Sayemon had made up his mind that the rest of his life should be sacrificed for the sake of Buddha, and that all worldly things should be cast aside. Ishidomaro and his wife needed no money for food, but were well provided for. Thus he need not trouble on those grounds. Sayemon determined to remain as he was, a poor monk, hidden in the monastery on Koya-san. With a desperate effort he continued, "I don't remember ever hearing of a Kato Sayemon's having been here, though of course I have heard of the Kato Sayemon who was the great friend of the Shogun Ashikaga." Ishidomaro was not at all satisfied with this answer. He felt somehow or other that he was in the presence of his father. Moreover, the priest had a black mole over his left eye, and he, Ishidomaro, had one exactly the same. Sir, said he, again addressing the priest, my mother has always particularly drawn my attention to the mole over my left eye, saying, my son, your father has such a mark over his left eye, the exact counterpart. Now remember this, for when you go forth to seek him, that this will be a sure sign to you. You, sir, have the exact mark that I have, and I know and feel that you are my father. With that, tears came into the eyes of Ishidomaro, and outstretching his arms, he cried, Father, father, let me embrace you. Sayemon trembled all over with emotion, but haughtily held up his head, and recovering himself, said, my lad, there are many men and many boys who have moles over their left eyebrows, and even over their right. I am not your father. You must go elsewhere to seek him. At this moment the chief priest came and called Sayemon to the evening services, which were held in the main temple. Thus it was that Sayemon preferred to devote his life to Buddha and, as Matsuzaki tells me, to emulate Buddha, rather than return to the ways of the world or to his family, or even to recognize his one and only son. My sympathies are with Ishidomaro, of whom, as his poor mother, we are told nothing further. To end in Mr. Matsuzaki's words, what became of Ishidomaro and his mother is not known, but it is told to this day that Kato Sayemon passed the rest of his life in peace and purity, entirely sacrificing his body and soul to Buddha, and did these things without any person to mourn over him, but in perfect contentment. In the third book of Sir Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia are the following verses, which were addressed to Buddha when he was a prince, by the winds. We are the voices of the wandering wind. Wander thou too, O prince, thy rest to find. Leave love for love of lovers, for woe's sake. Quit state for sorrow, and deliverance make. So sigh we, passing over the silver strings, to thee who know'st not yet of earthly things. So say we, mocking as we pass away, those lovely shadows wherewith thou dost play. No one, I feel sure, will fail to agree with me that Sayemon appears as a weak, selfish, and unheroic personage, not as a hero, much less as a Buddha. Footnote. Told to me by Mr. Matsuzaki, I cannot say that I think much of this story. Sayemon is made a hero, but he must appear to most as rather cowardly and low creature. I remarked upon this to Mr. Matsuzaki, saying, I do not see that the story is finished. You make Sayemon out a model person, whereas to me he appears the worst one in the story. Surely the wife and son should have come out as the good people. But you laud and praise Sayemon for leaving his family, and refusing to recognize them when they had no sin against themselves. I do not admit the difficulty, said Mr. Matsuzaki. It is the same as the Lord Buddha. He always left his wife and devoted his life to religious affairs, just as Sayemon did. Well, I could not agree with this. Buddha was Buddha, a benefactor and helper to the whole of Asia. Sayemon was a poor miserable weakling who simply sought personal peace. As far as the story goes, I defy anybody to find him a hero, or a person who in any way emulated Buddha, unless he did so from an entirely Japanese point of view. The story, however, is a quite celebrated one, referred to in many Japanese books. So Mr. Matsuzaki tells me. End of footnote. End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13 of Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Melodia Carey. Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan by Richard Gordon Smith. Great fire caused by a lady's dress. Some 120 years ago, in the year of Temei, a most terrible fire broke out in the western corner of Yedo, the worst fire probably that is known to the world's history, for it is said to have destroyed no fewer than 188,000 persons. At the time there lived in Yedo, now Tokyo, a very rich pawnbroker, Enshu Hikoemon, the proud possessor of a beautiful daughter aged 16, whose name was Osame, which in this instance is probably derived from the word sameru, to fade away, for in truth Osame-san did fade away. Enshu Hikoemon loved his daughter dearly, and he being a widower with no other child, his thoughts and affections were concentrated on her alone. He had long been rich enough to cast aside the mean thoughts and characteristics which had enabled him to reach his present position. From being a hard-hearted, relentless money-grubber, Enshu Hikoemon had become soft-hearted and generous, as far, at all events, as his daughter was concerned. One day, the beautiful Osame went to pray at her ancestors' graves. She was accompanied by her maid and, after saying her prayers, passed the temple of Homyoji, which is in the same grounds as Hongo Maruyama, and there, as she repeated her prayers before the image of Buddha, she saw a young priest, with whom she fell instantly in love. Hitherto she had had no love affair, nor indeed did she fully realize what had happened, beyond the fact that the youth's face pleased her to gaze upon. It was a solemn and noble face. As Osame lit a joss stick and handed it to the priest to be placed before Buddha, their hands met, and she felt pass through her body a thrill the like of which she had never experienced. Poor Osame was what is known as madly in love at first sight, in love so much that as she arose and left the temple, all she could see was the face of the young priest. Wherever she looked, she saw nothing else. She spoke not a word to her maid on the way home, but went straight to her room. Next morning she announced to the maid that she was indisposed. "Go," she said, "and tell my dear father that I shall remain in bed. I do not feel well this day." Next day was much the same, and so were the next and the next. Hikoemon, disconsolate, tried every means to enliven his daughter. He sought to get her away to the seaside. He offered to take her to the holy temple of Ise or to Kompira. She would not go. Doctors were called and could find nothing wrong with Osame-san. "She has something on her mind, and when you can get it off, she will be well," was all that they could say. At last Osame confessed to her father that she had lost her heart to a young priest in the Homyoji temple. "Nay," she said, "be not angry with me, father, for I do not know him, and have seen him only once. In that once I loved him, for he has a noble face, which haunts me night and day. And so it is that my heart is heavy, and my body sickens for the want of him. Oh, father, if you love me and wish to save my life, go and find him, and tell him that I love him, and that without him I must die." Poor Hikoemon! Here was a nice business, his daughter in love, dying of love for an unknown priest. What was he to do? First, he humored his daughter, and at last, after several days, persuaded her to accompany him to the temple. Unfortunately, they did not see the priest in question, nor did they on a second visit. And after this, Osame became more disconsolate than ever, absolutely refusing to leave her room. Night and day her sobs were heard all over the house, and her father was utterly wretched, especially as he had now found out secretly that the priest with whom his daughter had fallen in love was one of the most strict of Buddha's followers, and not likely to err from the disciplinarian rules of religion. In spite of this, Hikoemon determined to make an effort in behalf of his daughter. He ventured to the temple alone, saw the priest, told him of his daughter's love, and asked if a union would be possible. The priest spurned the idea, saying, Is it not evident to you by my robes that I have devoted my love to Buddha? It is an insult that you should make such a proposition to me." Hikoemon returned to his home deeply mortified at the rebuff, but felt it his duty to be candid with his daughter. Osame wept herself into hysterics. She grew worse day by day. Hoping to distract her mind, her father had got made for her a magnificent dress which cost nearly yen 4,000. He thought that Osame would be vain enough to wish to put it on and to go out and show it. This was no use. Osame was not like other women. She cared not for fine raiment or for creating sensations. She put the costume on in her room to please her father, but then she took it off again and went back to her bed, where 2 days later she died of a broken heart. Hikoemon felt the loss of his pretty daughter very much. At the funeral there must have been half a mile of flower bearers. The superb dress was presented to the temple. Such dresses are carefully kept. They remind the priests to say prayers for their late owners, as every 2 or 3 months they are being dusted and cleaned. The vicar or head priest of this temple, however, was not a good man. He stole this particular dress of Osame's, knowing the value, and sold it secretly to a second-hand dealer in such things. Some 12 months later the dress was again donated to the same temple by another father whose daughter had died of a love affair, he having bought the dress at the second-hand clothes shop. This girl died and was buried on the same day of the same month as Osame. The priest of the temple was not sorry to see the valuable garment return as a gift to his church, and, being mercenary, he sold it again. It seemed indeed a sort of gold mine to himself and his church. Imagine, therefore, the feeling among the priests when, in the following year, in the same month, and on exactly the same day as that on which Osame and the other girl had died, another girl of exactly the same age was buried in their cemetery, having died also of a love affair, and having also worn the splendid dress that Osame was given, which was duly presented to the temple at the conclusion of her burial service for the 3rd time. To say that the chief priest was astonished would be to say little. He and the rest of them were sorely perplexed and troubled. There were the honest priests, who had had nothing to do with the selling of the garment, and the dishonest head priest or vicar. The honest men were puzzled. The vicar was frightened into thinking honesty the best policy amid the circumstances. Accordingly, he assembled all the priests of the temple, made a hasty confession, and asked for advice. The priests came to one conclusion, and that was that the spirit of Asame-san was in the dress, and that it must be burned, and burned with some ceremony, so as to appease her spirit. Accordingly, a time was fixed. When the day arrived, many people came to the temple. A great ceremony was held, and finally the valuable garment was placed upon a stone cut in the shape of a lotus flower and lighted. The weather was calm at the time, but as the garment took fire, a sudden gust of wind came, instantly fanning the whole into flame. The gust increased into a storm, which carried one of the sleeves of the dress up to the ceiling of the temple, where it caught between 2 rafters and burned viciously. In less than 2 or 3 minutes, the whole temple was on fire. The fire went on for 7 days and 7 nights, at the expiration of which time nearly the whole of the south and western portions of Yedo were gone, and gone also were 188,000 people. The charred remains, as far as possible, were collected and buried, and a temple, which now exists, called Ekko-in, was built at the spot to invoke the blessing of Buddha on their souls. Note by Matsuzaki. At the present day, the Ekko-in temple is well known. Games and wrestling are held there twice a year. Visitors to the temple see the wrestling place, but no one asks why the temple was built there. End of Chapter 13. Maria Melodia Carey. End of Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan by Richard Gordon Smith.
Chapter 14 of Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Ray Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Ancient Tales and Folklore of Japan by Richard Gordon Smith. History of Awoto Fujitsuna. Footnote. Told to me by my friend Mr. Matsuzuki. End note. Hojo Tokiyori, who, my Murray says, was born in 1246 A.D. and died 17 years later in 1263, was regent for a time, young as he was. One day he went to worship at the shrine of Tsurugo Ata in Kamakura. That same evening he dreamed that one of the gods appeared to him and said, "Hojo Tokiyori, you are very young for a ruler, and there are some who will try to deceive you, for honest men are scarce. There is one man who is of exceptional honesty, however, and if you wish to govern the people successfully, it would be advisable to employ him. His name is Awoto Fujitsuna." Hojo Tokiyori told him of his dream. "Nay," said he, "it was more than a dream. It was a vision that called upon me to appoint you to the post, which I have done." "Ah, indeed," quoth Awoto Fujitsuna. "Then, sir, if you appoint high officials as the result of dreams and visions, it is a risky matter, for, by those dreams, we may some day be ordered to be beheaded." Hojo Tokiyori laughed at this, and said he hoped not. Awoto Fujitsuna turned out a most excellent and trustworthy official, popular, just, and honest. No one had a word against him, and Hojo Tokiyori was delighted. One day Fujitsuna was carrying over a bridge a bag of money belonging to the government. He fell, and the bag burst. Fujitsuna collected the money, with the exception of a half-cent piece, which had rolled in some way over the edge of the bridge and fallen into the river. Fujitsuna could have let it go, putting another in its place, but that course would not have been up to the high standard of his morals in such matters. He had lost a half-cent which belonged to the government. It was, he knew, in the river. Consequently, he refused to move on until it was recovered. That was clearly his duty. Awoto Fujitsuna ran to the houses at either end of the bridge, telling the villagers merely that he had dropped some government money into the river. Would they come and help him to find it? Of course they would, ready to help as the Japanese countrymen have been from time immemorial. All followed Fujitsuna into the river, men, women, and children, and a diligent search was kept up by several hundreds for many hours, without result, when at last, just as the sun was setting, an old farmer picked up the half-cent, which he presented to Fujitsuna. Fujitsuna was delighted, and told the people that things were all right now. He had recovered the money, thanks to the quick sight of the farmer. "But," they cried, "that is only a half-cent. Where is the rest?" "My friends," said Fujitsuna, "the half-cent is all that was lost. But that half-cent was not mine. It was part of the government treasure, and was entrusted to me, and it was my duty to recover it. Here are 30 yen for you who have helped me to find it, to spend in sake. That is my money, and remember what I tell you, that, No matter how small a thing is entrusted to you by the government, you must not lose it, but give up your life and fortune sooner. The villagers were much impressed with this great honesty and way of reasoning. Hojo Tokiyori, on hearing the little story, sent for and promoted Awoto Fujitsuna to a higher position than he had held before. But in spite of his advances and riches, the minister continued to work hard, to eat simple food, and to put on plain raiment, living in a cottage instead of occupying a palace, and devoting his life to his country. End of section 14. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Yeah. So our story's over. Our story's over. I gotta go, guys. So thanks for coming, Josiah. Love ya, and hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.